Today, we're tackling an issue that has stirred up quite a bit of debate in the Christian world, the Little God Doctrine. This teaching, which is found mainly within the Word of Faith theology and from teachers like Kenneth Copeland, suggests that believers are little gods because they share in the divine nature of God. It's a theology that draws on certain scriptures to assert that Christians possessed God-like powers and divine authority similar to God's own. But is that really what the Bible teaches? That's what we're here to unpack. We'll dig into the foundational scriptures that proponents of this doctrine often cite and look at them through the lens of solid biblical scholarship. We'll also incorporate the insights of the late Dr. Michael Heiser, whose work in the unseen realm offers a crucial perspective, particularly on Psalm 82, which is a key passage for those who advance the Little God Doctrine. I'll be tackling that and more on today's episode. I'm Grant Forrester, a pastor and apologist in Wilmington, North Carolina. This is Veiled Kingdoms. Let's pierce the veil. Let's start by laying the groundwork with one of the most frequently cited texts, Psalm 82. The foundation of the Little God Doctrine often begins with Psalm 82:6, which reads, "I said you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High." At first glance, this verse seems to support the idea that God himself is declaring human beings to be divine. But this is where careful, context-driven exegesis is necessary. When people who hold to the Little God Doctrine cite this verse, they generally pull it out of its full context, interpreting it to mean that Christians are essentially divine beings or little gods in the same sense as God himself. However, we must look closely at what this psalm is really about. Michael Heiser's groundbreaking research on the divine council worldview in ancient Israelite religion is especially helpful here. In the unseen realm, Heiser explains that Psalm 82 is not talking about humans at all. It's addressing a group of divine beings, Elohim, who are members of God's divine council. These beings were given authority by God to oversee the nations, but they have failed in their role. Psalm 82 is God's indictment on these rebellious divine beings. They were supposed to uphold justice among the nations, but instead, they allowed corruption and injustice to flourish. God refers to them as gods, this is Elohim, because they are spiritual beings, but they are not God himself. Heiser points out that in the ancient Near Eastern worldview, Elohim is a broad term that refers to any being in the spiritual realm, not just Yahweh. While these spiritual beings hold authority, they are not on par with Yahweh in terms of essence or power. In verse 7 of Psalm 82, we get the crucial context for this passage. "Nevertheless, you will die like men and fall like any one of the princes." These divine creatures are being judged. They will face death and destruction because they failed to care for the righteous, the poor, and the helpless. This verse makes it clear that the gods in question are not humans, but spiritual entities being held accountable by Yahweh. So when someone quotes Psalm 82:6 as proof that Christians are gods, they're misapplying the text. Psalm 82 isn't about human beings at all, let alone declaring that we share in God's divine nature. This passage is actually about the judgment of rebellious spiritual beings, not an elevation of humanity to godlike status. Another key passage often used to support the Little God Doctrine is John 10:34, where Jesus says, "Is it not written in your law, I said you are gods?" Here, Jesus is quoting Psalm 82:6 in response to accusations of blasphemy from the Jewish leaders. Those who advocate for the Little God Doctrine, like Kenneth Copeland, argue that Jesus was affirming the idea that humans are gods. But once again, we need to pay close attention to what's happening in the text. Jesus is in the middle of a heated exchange with the religious leaders who are accusing him of blasphemy because he claimed to be one with the Father. In response, Jesus cites Psalm 82:6, reminding them that even their own scriptures use the term gods to refer to certain beings. His point is to show the inconsistency in their reasoning. If their scriptures refer to certain creatures as gods, why should they accuse him of blasphemy for claiming divine sonship? However, Jesus is not affirming that human beings are divine in the way that proponents of the Little God Doctrine claim. He's using Psalm 82 rhetorically to expose the hypocrisy of his accusers. As Michael Heiser explains, Jesus is pointing back to the divine counsel scene of Psalm 82 to make a theological point about his own authority, not to suggest that all believers are gods. It's essential to understand that in the context of Second Temple Judaism, where Jesus is operating, the use of the term Elohim, gods, in Psalm 82 referred to spiritual beings, not human beings. Jesus' use of the text is rooted in that ancient context, and it was never meant to suggest that humans share in the divine essence. A third passage often cited to support the Little God Doctrine is Genesis 1:26, where God says, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Some take this to mean that humans being made in God's image are essentially little gods. But this, again, misunderstands what it means to be made in the image of God. Being made in God's image does not mean we share in his divine nature. It means we are his representatives on earth. As Michael Heiser points out, the idea of being made in the image of God is about function and not essence. In the ancient Near East, kings were often described as being the image of a god, meaning that they were that god's representatives on earth. In the same way, humans are made in God's image to represent his authority and dominion over creation. However, there is a clear line between creator and creation that should never be blurred. While we bear God's image, we are not divine beings. We are not little versions of God. To claim otherwise is to misunderstand both the Bible and the theological distinction between God and humanity. At the heart of the Little God Doctrine is a fundamental error in theology: the failure to maintain the creator-creation distinction. The Bible consistently teaches that God alone is divine, and he alone is worthy of worship. Passages like Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," and Isaiah 45 verse 5, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God." These passages clearly affirm that there is only one God and no other being shares in his divine nature. Even though we are made in God's image, we remain part of creation, entirely dependent on him for our existence. The Little God Doctrine dangerously elevates humanity to a position that Scripture never grants. It blurs the line between creator and creation, leading to a distorted view of God's sovereignty and our role in his plan. One of the most troubling aspects of the Little God Doctrine is how it can foster a theology of entitlement and power. In many Word of Faith teachings, this doctrine is connected to the idea that believers can speak things into existence or claim divine authority over their circumstances. This is nothing but New Age manifestation under the guise of Christianity. And so this shifts the focus from humble dependence on God to a self-centered pursuit of power. The emphasis becomes about what we can do with our divine status rather than submitting ourselves to God's will and trusting in his sovereignty. This theological error not only distorts our understanding of God, but also undermines the nature of the Christian life. Scripture calls us to humble submission, to take up our cross and to follow Christ. Our power is found not in claiming divinity, but in recognizing our weakness and depending on God's grace. As Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness." In summary, the Little God Doctrine rests on a misinterpretation of Scripture. Psalm 82, properly understood, is about God's judgment of rebellious spiritual beings, not an affirmation of human divinity. John 10:34, where Jesus quotes Psalm 82, is a rhetorical device used to expose the hypocrisy of his accusers, not an endorsement of human godhood. And Genesis 1:26 teaches that humans are made in God's image, but this refers to our role as representatives, not our essence. The Little God Doctrine ultimately fails because it misapplies the Bible and ignores the clear distinction between creator and creation. We are not gods. We are image bearers called to reflect God's character and authority, but always in humble submission to His will. Thanks for joining us today on Veiled Kingdoms. If you have any questions or thoughts on this topic, feel free to drop them in the comments below. As always, don't forget to subscribe for more biblical content. Thanks for listening, and God bless.